Good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome to Couch Conversations with the Doctors, where health is wealth. So I want to welcome all of you all for being here on this evening, and I want to remind everyone to share once again, and join us on Couch Conversations with the Doctors. As always, we're going to go around our table, and we're going to introduce each and every doctor that's here. To my coworker, we'll start with my coworker. My coworker, Dr. Douglas Graham. Why don't you tell the people hello?
Hey, Nikki, thank you very much. I'm a physician. I've been retired for a couple of years. I worked in the Western suburbs for 30 years and in the Congressman's office for a couple of years working on healthcare issues. It's a real honor to be on this panel and work with my colleagues. And I'm going to try and answer your questions if I can.
Yeah, but I've met with them many times. I support them.
Everybody?
Hello, Nikki. Okay, there you go. No, Nikki, you muted again. Okay.
To the doctor who says I threatened him to be here every Monday night, but he seems to always be here on time. That's our very own Dr. James Miller. Dr. Miller.
Good evening, everyone. We're so happy to be here again. My name is Dr. James Miller. I'm a retired physician. I retired from practicing clinical medicine in 2019. Spent a lot of time in Chicago and surrounding suburbs, practicing medicine for about 40 years. Learned a lot of things, and even though I retired from the practice of clinical medicine, I'm still in the business of healing the community. So I'm here tonight to participate in the conversation, hopefully to provide some information that's going to make your life healthier and richer.
Outstanding, outstanding. To the young woman who is a phenomenal physician who is known as Dr. 100, that's our very own Dr. Maya Greene. Dr. Greene.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Nikki. Hello, Congressman. Thank you all for having me, and hello to my esteemed panel. Always giving me a lesson in history, and in the case of Dr. Kim Williams, receipts, learning before I met you, so it's an honor to be here. I'm very excited about what we're going to share and what I'm going to learn. Thank you.
Outstanding, outstanding. To the young man who is the barbecue chef extraordinaire, but he's also a fantastic physician, that's our very own Dr. Pete, Dr. Bonnie Pete Thomas.
Hey, Nikki. It is a pleasure for me to be here to share this esteemed panel. I'm looking forward to hearing Dr. Kim, and I appreciate yourself and Congressman Davis for creating this forum. I hope the community will enjoy this talk today.
Outstanding. To the doctor who is the weight loss guru, but he really has a passion to be the next Iron Chef. That's our very own Dr. Tony Hampton.
I am so happy to be here and just really appreciate this opportunity, as with every night, to teach the healing message, and I'm really all about achieving metabolic health for everybody. And although I tend to encourage, doing that with carb restriction, it's so cool to be on a panel with a couple of docs who, do a low fat approach when I'm a low carb doc. And I just think that's really important, because the messaging needs to be that we're all really working to achieve the same thing. So it's nice to hear different perspectives, because to be honest with you, they both can work. So it's just about figuring out what's best for you. And I appreciate our guest today, who's going to share some of his perspective.
Outstanding. To the urologist of the stars, but he really hates to have those accolades. That's our very own Dr. Terry Mason.
Good evening, and thank you, Nikki, for being here. I really appreciate this opportunity just to talk with everyone. And I'm really, really honored to be on this panel with Dr. Kim Williams. Dr. Kim Williams and I go back a ways, and I've learned tremendously from him. He's my own cardiologist and internist, and I'm a little upset because he's going to be moving on, and we wish him well. But I really, 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 really have admired Dr. Williams as past president of the American College of Cardiology, representing over 40,000 cardiologists worldwide, but was humble enough to come to a little church on the south side of Chicago called Trinity United Church of Christ. And there we embarked upon a study that was published. And we're actually still trying to work on the next phase of that. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about that. But just a man whose passion, I mean, I've seen him everywhere from Soul Veg to the Ivory Towers. So I'm glad to be sharing this panel tonight with Dr. Kim Williams. Thank you so much, Dr. Williams, for being here.
Thanks.
Well, Dr. Kim Williams, the cardiologist extraordinaire, who actually has not gotten approvals from us to go anywhere, Dr. Mason. So I think we may just have to pin that for a second. But you know, as much as I love Dr. Williams, my introduction of him would not do him justice. So to the man who makes this all possible for us to do, to the one who is a vanguard on healthcare, the congressman of the Illinois 7th Congressional District, Dr. Kim Williams is good friend. He can do the best in introducing him. So Congressman, if I can bring you now to introduce Dr. Kim, that would be fantastic.
Well, let me just tell you, it's such a great pleasure to have all of these esteemed citizens, physicians, and world leaders, local leaders, and all the things that all of you do. I don't have much to say this evening. I did a lot of talking last week. I spoke to 3,000 young people at the Bolingbrook High School, which was very interested in 3 different sessions. I don't know why I was in Bolingbrook, but it was kind of interesting because the mayor of the town was there, superintendent of schools was there, and of course the principal and many community residents who used to live in Chicago but had moved out to Bolingbrook. Then Tuesday, I went down to Nashville, Tennessee to do the honors convocation for Fisk University and just had a wonderful time and visited a number of classrooms. And they were discussing and talking about some of my favorite people. And then I came back, and Saturday night, we celebrated a company in the North Lawndale community that has been right there on Harrison Street for 100 years. And even though some things have changed, hearing that Dr. Williams might be doing something else is almost unimaginable. You know, the oldest hospital, I guess, in Chicago is Rush. And it's quite old. It's been there a long time. But, you know, the heart is such an integral part of our being. And if something happens to it, you know, there was a blues singer say, when your white corpuscles eat up your red, Jack, you ain't living, you dead. I think Ray Charles used to sing that. But if something happens to your heart, then you better get some help real quick. And you probably better do everything that you can do before then. You know, I think some of you have heard me mention that this commercial on radio, I just love it, you know, where you're told, you know, I may be leaving you and I gotta go. So I really can leave anytime I want to. So you act like you don't care as much about me as you used to because you're not doing the things that keep me around. Well, let me just say that all of us who've known of the work of Dr. Williams, all of us who've known of his expertise, all of us who've known of his contribution to medical science can do nothing but be proud that he's been a part of our community and a part of the community where we live, work, and have hope for it. So we're delighted that he is with us this evening. We say thank you, but I really say thanks to all of you for being with us, because I continue to hear comments about Monday nights. No matter where I go, I run into somebody, whether it's at the grocery store, at the rodeo, or wherever it is. I hear people talking about what they glean from these Monday night discussions. So thank you all. Dr. Williams, thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It's wonderful to be here again. But I do have some news, and that is, yes, I am giving up with a bit of sadness the chair or the chief of cardiology at Rush to be chair of medicine at University of Louisville. But I got to give you a little background. I took this interview because they were interested in healthcare disparities. And there are places in this country where Inglewood, Gresham, where I grew up, where we have these horrible cardiovascular disease burdens. And the West End, where that's famous for Muhammad Ali being born there, is one of those places. And we talk about Inglewood versus Streeterville and the 30-year difference in life expectancy. But if you go from the east side of Louisville to the west side, you're seeing a similar kind of differential. And I have a university that really wants to engage, and they wanted leadership who was willing to try and engage. Now, the good news is that I have wonderful contacts at Rush, and they, unbeknownst to me, they had actually great contacts at University of Louisville. So I'm actually, I'm leaving in terms of my leadership of the division, but I'm not leaving, Dr. Mason, until we get that second study done. I'm just adding a second city. We are going to, it turns out, I tried going by there, but they were closed. But my grandfather was a pastor at one of the Baptist churches. And I'm just going to go knock on their door and say, I got Trinity, Chicago, and I got, a church in, hopefully, if they're willing, that's going to do the same thing. And we will have a multi-center trial going instead of a single center. So, and then the other side is that I'm from the South Side. I'm, working on the West Side, live in the South Loop. I've always been in Danny Davis's area, and so I'm not going to give up my residence. I don't know what I'm going to rent or what I'm going to do, live in my car, but I'm still going to be from Chicago.
Well, all right. And they got some preachers down there too. So, the Elliott family is a family of ministers down there, and they are great. And one of their brothers, of course, was right down the street here. But wow, they've been a part of the action. And there was a Dr. Harvey, I'm trying to remember Harvey's last name, that I knew, who became the mayor of Louisville.
Wow.
And yeah, but he ran one of the community health centers when I first knew him. That's what he was doing. So we're ready to roll then, Nikki, I guess.
Sure thing. Well, Dr. Mason, you have this outstanding presentation that you and Dr. Kim have for us today. So take it away. Start it off.
Well, first of all, let me just say that I am truly honored and humbled to be able to be in the same presentation, in the same room with Dr. Williams. I mean, this man has done so much, and we are going to raise that money and get that second study done. I'll let Dr. Williams talk more about that. But what we want to do is, Dr. Williams, there's been a lot of discussion. We've had a lot of discussion, even on this panel, alluded to earlier by Dr. Hampton. But, I've always think about, just to stoke the fires a little bit, I always think of nothing more low carb than eating plant-based.
Yep.
Because it is the lowest carb diet, probably a way of eating. So I'm a little always confused about that. But Dr. Williams, there's been a lot of things that and we've had a conversation here about, and I just want you to, from your position and from your vantage point, tell us your thoughts about these things and how we should contextualize this conversation.
So thanks so much. And I always enjoy talking it out with Dr. Hampton, all I'm doing is quoting the literature that's out there, and a fair amount of clinical experience. I did have so many people who, after they had done the keto diet for a while, just as in the medical literature, they ended up with a cardiac event because in some people, the LDL doesn't change. Most people, it goes up. Some people, it triples. And those are the people who get into real trouble. Now, but the problem is that it's how you define, and this may be what Dr. Hampton is referring to, it's how do you define low carb and keto diet? And it turns out that what you're saying, Dr. Mason, is absolutely true. The Seidelman article from 2018 in Lancet Public Health made it very clear. If you do a low carb diet with animal products, that is, you're inheriting the trimethylamine N oxide, saturated fat, cholesterol, all the inflammation that goes into your bloodstream from the bad microbiome that happens when you eat, let's be honest, the decaying flesh of a dead animal. It turns out that all of those things pile up to worsen your outcome and increase your heart attack rate. But what she also published was that if you did low carb with plants, as you were saying, Dr. Mason, and you're making sure that you're not eating any refined carbs and you're very low on the carbohydrate side as opposed to the plant protein side, it was an 18% decrease in mortality over the controlled diet. So, you know, if it's not a problem of low carb, it's whether or not you do it with animal products or not. That's what the issue is. And then when we had this last conversation last time, and I don't know if it's legal, Dr. Nicole, Nikki, can I steal the screen just for a moment? Is that legal?
Sure.
Okay, here we go. I'm going to show the slides. I have no slides. Let's see. Oh, so my computer, there we go. Actually, I don't. It's what I was going to show you was one article, and it doesn't look like it's going to, I don't have the permission to show my screen. So I'm just going to have to tell you, and the people can certainly look it up. There was an article that was published a few months ago that is the biggest vegan I told you so you ever want to hear. It's in the British Medical Journal, Nutrition, Prevention, and Health journal. It was published in October of 2021, and it's entitled Plant-Based Diets, Pescatarian Diets, and COVID-19 Severity. 6 countries, case control, and what it showed basically is one major thing. If you did a low-carb, high-protein diet, and I wish you could see this graph I'm showing, it had about a 50% increase in severe COVID outcomes. Whereas if you did a plant-based diet, it was a 73% decrease, hazard ratio of 0.27. Why? Because all of the COVID bad outcomes come from being hypertensive, diabetic, obese, and all of those are controlled by the microbiome. And the microbiome is all those bacteria that are in your GI tract. And those bacteria are good ones if you're not eating carcasses of dead animals, and they're bad ones if you are eating those. And it turns out that the microbiome controls everything, cardiovascular and neurologic and COVID outcomes. Everyone's heard of cytokine storm. It comes from the GI tract. And if you don't have those bacteria, you do not get COVID sick. And so I'm check with Dr. Mason, because I check with every plant-based guru that I see. Has anybody seen a whole food plant-based diet person die of COVID? Because I haven't, and everyone I check with says the same thing. I mean, it can't be true. It's got to be small sample size or something, because anything could happen. But I can't get anyone to verify that happened. This was actually studied not of mortality. It was just moderate to severe illness, and it was just very, very infrequent if you did a plant-based diet.
All right, I'll definitely, this will be a cordial conversation. Let me start with that, because I think it's important that people understand how could it be that 2, intelligent doctors, I guess 3 in this case, in terms of different perspectives, how can we look at things that look to be the same study and have different interpretations? And I learned that when I started my nutrition and functional medicine studies. I'm surrounded really by a lot of people who have a more plant-based approach, but thankfully I had a perspective that allowed me to not necessarily just think, do what the teacher says. I had a chance to question things. So one of the things I want to share as it relates to the study by the Lancet. I've had a chance to think about that study a little bit because it actually is quoted quite often. And what I learned in school was that you have to see, the problem with nutrition is that it's always quality of the study, and you can't do to humans necessarily what you can do to mice and other animals, and we definitely want to do that ethically as well. So there's a couple of things that make me pause about the Lancet study. Number one is the study was they used food frequency questionnaires. It was a prospective cohort study. And when you're having those types of studies with food frequency questionnaires, although they add tremendous value, they are not showing causation. They show correlation or association. So you have to at least pause and know what you're looking at, number one. Number two, it said exactly what the doctor said. It showed that if you eat animal based versus plant-based, the mortality was higher with the animal-based diet. So that's true, but it is a association correlation study. So that's number one. Number two, when you think about Lancet, and I've had a chance to talk to others about Lancet, like Nina Teicholz, for example, and what I found is that there's you have to know who made the study. Well, Lancet is a very biased organization in that 78% of the 30 or so people who were making decisions about when they made the because Lancet has a Eat Lancet article that they put out to tell you what to eat, and it really impacts what we eat. Well, 78% of them are vegetarian or vegan, so so it's not that they should be. It's just that you need to know that when you're making decisions about who to trust. And the number one person who leads that group is Walter Willett, who is at Harvard, and he's very biased towards vegetarian and vegan. So again, we don't want a low carb guy like myself not being able to talk about and do research like the doctor is suggesting he's going to be doing. It's just that you need to disclose these things so you'll understand the bias. So I want to say those things first, just to say the studies that we're looking at are epidemiological studies, and epidemiological studies that are done with surveys and you're looking at data is not the same as randomized controlled studies. So when you get to randomized controlled studies, it's clear that the saturated fat is not as bad as we thought. In fact, when the World Health Organization made comments about saturated fat, you found that it really didn't. The randomized controlled trials, which is a higher level of evidence, does not show that saturated fat causes heart disease. Now, why would I feel confident about those statements? Well, when we had our conversation on this program, the American College of Cardiology is endorsing low carb and keto. Not saying that you need to do low carb and keto, or should I say, I shouldn't say endorse. They say it should be one of the recommended dietary patterns to consider: Mediterranean, low fat, low carb, very low carb. So now the American Heart Association on March of this year said that. The Journal of the College of Cardiology has said that saturated fat is not associated with heart disease. So, and this happened, I think, in June of 2020. So I guess my purpose in having this conversation is not to make you keto, low carb, carnivore, or to make you, consider low fat. It's to let you know that you may have options that you didn't know you had. Because if we're only thinking that the one option is the only option, and you have a ton of people in communities of color who are not going to do the option anyway, it's nice to know that there are other options. So I think that's kind of where I would frame my initial thoughts. I just think that people are so afraid of eating meat when the studies don't support that. But again, if you look at observational epidemiological studies, it does support that, but we're not going to rely on that. We're going to go to a higher level of evidence.
Yeah, I just would like to say, so if you're the average community person, how would I interpret both arguments in terms of what would my takeaway be? So can I eat a steak once a month? Is it okay for me to have baked chicken? I don't know. What should I do?
So let me just start with your question, and then I'll go back to discuss some of the things that Dr. Hampton brought up. So first of all, there are very few of those observational studies that deal with dose response. Those that do look at it, and that was predominantly the Nurses Health and Health Professional Follow-Up Study, Walter Willett's group, as Dr. Hampton mentioned, they say that the biggest jump in the mortality is between 0 and 1 per day. But they didn't do once a week, or they didn't do once a month. So no, I don't think anyone can actually answer your question. I would say that, I said this, I think I might have upset a few people, but one of my roles is the journal editor, and the Plantrition Project actually put together the International Journal of Disease Reversal and Prevention. And I told them that I don't have opinions on this at all. I am totally going with whatever literature is available. Prospective randomized trial studies are few and far between because they do not last long enough. People would talk about doing a caveman diet. Well, cavemen typically died at age 35. And so you can't extrapolate that kind of eating to people trying to have sustained longevity into their 70s, 80s, and 90s. And so we don't have all we have for 30-year outcomes is observational trials. So in terms of ACC and AHA, the last guidelines that were, I'm not talking about the journals are independent. The last guidelines that came out of those organizations I actually wrote, and that's the 2019 primary prevention. And it really does discuss the difference between the randomized trial evidence that we have for like the Mediterranean, 5 years of outcome showing a dramatic reduction in stroke if you switch from red meat to fish and a little poultry, given olive oil or given nuts. Either way, you dramatically drop stroke. What you didn't see was a decrease in cardiovascular death, total death, or heart attack. So for a cardiologist, doing a Mediterranean diet compared to eating a regular diet had no value because they all have animals. And so I would ask everyone to focus specifically on the underlying mechanism. It isn't just saturated fat, and it isn't just the idea of cholesterol, for example. It's the inflammatory markers that happen, and the heme iron that you don't get when you're eating plants. You don't get heme iron. And so when you put all of these risk factors together, it's very clear that we ought to be doing the kinds of things that would sustain our health and our longevity, sustain the planet, okay, and try to make sure that these greenhouse gases don't make this place uninhabitable for the next couple of generations.
Yeah, that's you definitely point out some good stuff in terms of like what we should be thinking about. And if anybody is and I apologize to my panelists, we're kind of going back and forth as opposed to the more engaging conversations we have. But I do want to say that I do agree with you that inflammation is the most important thing. Now, I want you to understand that people in the low carb community, and I would go as far as carnivore, I tell patients, if you're going to take a chance on doing this approach, then let's measure your inflammatory markers. So we're going to do an insulin level, a C-peptide, a homocysteine, a alpha lipoprotein, large particle, small particle, LDL. And then if you see things move in a direction that is harmful, then I throw my hands up and let's do something different for you, because we do have to individualize. There are lean mass hyper responders, which I'm not going to explain, but there are different people with different responses. So I think for anybody listening to this, it's very important that if you decide to choose any approach, low fat meaning vegetarian or vegan, low carb meaning keto and carnivore, things like that, you really want to ask your clinician, let's get a baseline of where we are. Let's see how we're doing. I'm really intrigued by this conversation. I want to try Dr. Hampton's approach. I'm going to do that for 6 months, and then I'll maybe try Dr. Williams and Dr. Terry Mason's approach. So my point of it is, what I found, this is how I look at it, big picture, right? We're in 30,000 feet in the air. if I'm doing things that, and patients may know that the LDL, the small particles versus the large particles matter, right? And let's just say they are measuring those things, and all of a sudden I do a diet where the small particles go down and large particles are, larger or whatever, but it looks favorable. And, all those things we measure. I do a coronary artery calcium score. I don't have plaques, and so what I'm saying is, let's put all this information together. And what I found in my practice is that when I put people on this anti-inflammatory low carb diet, everything gets better. And the worst thing that may happen is maybe the LDL changes in a less favorable way. Many times when I do the particle sizes, that turns out to be okay as well. So, but I guess what I'm getting at is, when you factor in what's happened with the American Heart Association and the statement that the American Journal of the College of Cardiology, when you factor in the fact that they're now saying it's okay to eat low carb keto, right? Carnivore, we don't have the data at all. They only have like observational studies for carnivore. What do you do with a person who's in front of you who's not going to be able to do vegetarian or vegan, and they really want to feel comfortable, as Dr. Pete suggested, eating a steak every once in a while? And we do have enough information that would say, well, these organizations are now endorsing it, so, or at least making it an option. How do you reconcile that? Because I know you've been in the plant-based space for quite some time, and you probably were surprised when they endorsed it. So how do you reconcile that?
So I actually haven't seen the endorsement. If you could send it to me, that'd be great.
Oh yeah, okay.
Because what they did endorse, both organizations, are prevention guidelines. We talked about them again 2 weeks ago at the ACC, and that is the official position until something changes. And they would have run it by us, and I was the person on the prevention committee writing the guidelines. And so no one has approached us and say, hey, we're going back. I mean, when I did the hypertension guidelines, there were 2 sections, AFib and valvular, where we came to a completely different conclusion than recent ACC guidelines. I had to contact the chairs and say, hey, this is when I'm coming back. Are you going to retract yours? Are you going to tell me why I'm wrong? So we always have that internal communication if we're going to change guidelines. And so I would love to see those, any position statement that would support anything other than the 5 guidelines recommendations that we put forward. And then promulgated again 2 weeks ago at the ACC meeting. There's one thing you mentioned that I needed to correct, and just in case somebody's watching. You were talking about Walter Willett's group at Harvard. Sarah Seidelman is actually at Yale, and she might be quite upset to talk about, it's mostly football, Harvard versus Yale, but not really. I have a daughter who went to Harvard or went to Yale, and a granddaughter at Harvard, and there you go. You don't want to tell them that they're the same. So I would say that we do have an opportunity to, every time we're in clinic, everyone should be taking the dietary history, as I'm sure you do. I don't see it in every note from every physician. We do that in cardiology, and I'm hoping that at my next job, whenever I look at an H&P and I don't see lifestyle issues, then I contact the physician and say, hey, your H&Ps are missing something. But the point is that you have to meet people where they are. Now, I do some extreme stuff. If I know that the person is a churchgoer, I will tell them Genesis 1:29, which says you're basically supposed to eat plants and seeds, and that should be yours for meat. And they typically smile, and I say, well, if you don't believe your cardiologist, you got a problem. You don't believe the word of God, you got a much bigger problem. As it turns out, you can always, but my point is that you can always engage a person where they are and try to get them to move in a direction of health. And that the Willett data that I was talking about, the less you do, Dr. Pete, the less you do, the better off your mortality is. So I would try to get people to move in a plant-based direction. I give them all the motivation. I talk about the planetary health and talk about the animal cruelty. I mean, I tell you, what is the death rate of eating beef? It's 100% for the cow. And so I do anything I can to try to get them aligned with more of a plant-based mentality. And I've had a fair amount of success. Admittedly, it's more success after a person's had a heart attack, particularly if they've had one of those keto heart attacks that are in the literature from like 7 different studies. It's not just Seidelman. And so the egg data is very similar, the processed red meat data. And in this audience, I want to bring up just one last thing, because I haven't said it yet. And that is the unique association between chronic kidney disease and eating animal products, particularly red meat and processed red meat. This is something that we didn't know about a few years ago. We had no idea that chronic kidney disease, CKD stage 2, stage 3, can actually be halted or reversed by plant protein. This is all over the nephrology literature. I hope everybody takes a good look at it. And I wish I was able to show my slides, because I would just show you quickly over a couple minutes. But the issue is that there's a unique relationship between the acid formation of eating animal protein and what happens to the kidneys. Why is it so important for our population? African Americans are, with the help of Dr. Davis, or Danny Davis, Congressman Davis, we have a method of covering the people who get end-stage renal disease. They are going to be covered by Medicare 100%. It's about $91,000 per year for dialysis. And it would be apparently, based on Kidney International and National Kidney Foundation information, it would be 100% avoidable if people did plants. So it turns out that we are 13% of the population, and we're 35% of the dialysis. And so we need to move that needle. It's not, and as a cardiologist, why am I talking about it? Because, in a modern society in the United States, renal replacement therapy is everywhere. If somebody gets sick off of kidney failure, they're going to go to an emergency room, hopefully. Their potassium, acidosis, all going to be corrected, and they're going to go on dialysis. So people don't die quickly of chronic kidney disease. They die of heart disease. Over 50% of them die of heart disease because of the pressure overload and the acceleration of plaque and the acidosis, the homocysteine level that you mentioned, everything going biochemically haywire, all of it avoidable if you did plant-based nutrition. So if we don't have time for me to show my slides, then please, everybody, Google vegan diet kidney disease, and you'll see all of this literature pop up.
One of the things I wanted to just add to Dr. Williams, and to go back to, because what you started, what we worked on at Trinity was so important as a start. And it's by no means the end of the story. But what it did show is that in an 100% African-American population, that change can take place from dietary manipulation. And what we saw, even again, and again, this all needs to be re-verified, which is why Dr. Williams and I have been talking about more money to redo a larger study, because we need to verify what this pilot has shown. And what the pilot did show was that the inflammatory markers, and the one that was the most important that we did was the TMAO, trimethylamine oxide, that marker dropped over 40% in a little over 4 weeks.
That's right.
We weren't talking about a long time. This is just a very, very short time. And that's what gets me so excited about this. I'm not interested, and neither is Dr. Williams, in a battle over which one is to eat the best to eat, other than what does the science tell us. And what it told me, in fact, when I showed these preliminary, and again, the study that we want to do was not randomized, and it was not controlled, randomized controlled study. And there's other things that are going to be in the design of the new study that hopefully will give us even more information. Because, I'm a guy who used to eat a steak every day, and I ended up on the table with a coronary angiogram, and that coronary angiogram led to a stent that I had to have put in my heart, and I was symptomatic because I got pain on exertion, actually crazy may seem, on a treadmill. So this is real to me, and it's real to many people that I know in my family and not in my family. And so these questions, and that's why I asked Dr. Kim to come, because these questions are not about just this versus that. It's how do we get closest to the truth? How do we look at these things scientifically in such a way that we can say, I'm not the only anti-diet I'm against is any anti-diet that makes you die. You know, I think that's why we call them diets, because that's what's happening. We're dying from them. And what we really do need to do is think about how do we create livids for people. So food programs that are consisting that are made of the things that enjoy and give us longevity. So Dr. Williams, I'm really looking forward, because of the things you and I have talked about trying to get this done. And we're going to be, the Health Policy Institute of Chicago is going to be helping to raise money to get this study done, because it's so important that we take responsibility for the research being done to help us, needs to involve us, and we need to lead it.
You know, I think we're on the same page, because to be honest with you, I think what you echoed is that we're all trying to achieve the same thing. My hope is that by being on this panel and being one of the voices is that we can help people see that there are more than just one way to do this, hopefully supported by the data. And the irony of this conversation is that I just did a podcast with a nutrition professional. Her name is Teresa Rodriguez, and that'll probably come out in a couple of weeks. And she's writing a book, believe it or not, that's saying, I can't remember the title, I'm trying to think of it right now, but she's writing a book that actually is showing how a low carb diet can improve renal function. So my point of it is this. In fact, Dr. David Unwin in the UK, and I'll share his study. His study shows that you can improve renal function in patients who are, diabetic, et cetera, by restricting carbs, because the glycation and all the inflammation that occurs in the kidneys will, obviously reverse. Now, this is not just something I hear my colleagues talking about. This is something that I see in my clinical practice. I do not exaggerate. Today, I had a patient. It was my first or second patient. His microalbumin was over 2,000. He, over 3 months, restricted his carbs, and it went down to 200. If you talk to most traditionally trained doctors, they believe that once your kidneys go bad, they're not going to recover. There is a point, there's stages. There's 5 stages of kidney disease, stages 1 through 5, stage 3A and lower, 1, 2, and 3A. I've seen it over and over again. People reverse their kidney insufficiency or failure when they restrict carbs. Now, let's be clear. If you compare any study to the standard American diet, they all look wonderful. Mediterranean, DASH, low fat, because the standard American diet will kill you, right? However, what's clear also is that if you can get somebody early in the process to make these changes, low carb, low fat, reduce inflammation, they can reverse what looks to be a life of that, dialysis and praying for a kidney. So my goal is to just let people know, and I'll share Dr. David Unwin is a gentleman who makes these infographics to show you, 6 cubes of sugar for the slice of bread or whatever. It just puts it in front of you. And so, but he took his patients, I think it was 143 patients in his clinic, and over the course of about, I can't remember the number of years, but I'm going to guess 5 to 7 years, he was able to show all of these metabolic things get better, including renal function, in a large percentage of the patients. So I do think that there's many ways to get the job done. What I don't want is to ignore that things are happening in this other space that's helpful, as opposed to just thinking it's only in this other space. I try to see both sides of the equation. I'm very happy when I see a patient. I have patients who are vegan and carnivore. I'm on both sides of the spectrum, and I let people stay in the lane they're comfortable with. What worries me is if we, demonize something that maybe doesn't deserve that. And that's what makes me, I just want to make sure my colleagues and my panel members are all, being willing to question conventional thinking, question their own belief systems. And if something shifts in a different direction based on the evidence, to be able to look at that and say, oh my God, it may not be my way. I may not want to eat a cow, but man, this may not be a bad way for a patient to go if they choose to go in that direction.
Outstanding. No, I'm sorry, Dr. Kim, while we're waiting to make sure that we can get our our IT stuff going so Dr. Kim can eventually share his slides. And I'm going to send you, I'm going to text you Dr. Hampton's email address so maybe you can send them to him and he can actually open
Yeah.
them on his end if we still can't get our IT stuff together. But I want to say hey to some of our viewers really quickly who got some things that they want to say to you guys. So Gwen Butler says, hello guys. Linda Johnson says, good evening to everyone. Linda Johnson also says, yes, this panel is awesome. And she has great red hearts behind that. Heart health. So she has big red hearts behind it. May Ross says, good evening, everyone. Jenna May says, hi. Victor Ramos says, thank you, doctors. Great job, Dr. Hampton. Janet Scott says, would a low carb plant based diet reduce your high triglycerides? My family has a history of stroke. Audrey, so I want to pin that question so you guys can answer that if you get the opportunity. Audrey Jaycock says, late, but I'm here. Good evening, everyone. Travis says, steaks every day. Okay, I think Dr. Mason kind of shared that a minute ago. Gwen Butler says, I am a KKK, a keto crazed kid. Okay. Kim Love says, of course, I am a carnivore. You would be encouraging us to eat. All right, Linda Johnson says, hey, Nikki, can you, if Dr. Williams chat in information in the chat? Okay, we definitely will make sure that you can have that information that Dr. Williams was talking about in the chat. We will make sure that you have that. Monique Crawford says, this is such great information. And Kim Love said, hey, doctors, great info. All right, we have tons and tons of more chats jotting in. Let's see how we're doing here. We do have a question from a Chicago police officer who's a sergeant who asked the question just as well. After changing my diet and eating differently, and I feel it's eating better, I am doing more of a plant-based, very, very low carb. My blood pressure still will not come down. Can this be environmental, or what can I do to get my blood pressure down?
So I can tell you that that's an entire assessment. It does have to do with the microbiome, the environment, stress in the and I would say, you know, what is in that plant-based low carb diet and how much sodium is in there, how much alcohol is there. So I'm really just quoting the our 2017 hypertension guidelines, where we tried to deal not with drugs. And, you know, it was kind of funny to be accused of being in the pharmaceutical industry or somehow or influenced by them because we dropped the target from 140 to 130 systolic. Now, it wasn't about drugs. It was about lifestyle and getting people to exercise, lose weight, lower the sodium, increase the potassium, more plants, because you get that nitric oxide for vasodilation from plants, and cutting back on the alcohol. And if a person is doing all of that, they really need to see a hypertension specialist. Come on down to Louisville.
Yeah, I agree 100% that there is multifactorial. I'll only add that I created my Nest and Rope acronym to address those other issues. So, you know, the nutrition, the exercise, the less stress, the more sleep, the positive thinking, the recovering from trauma. The R is for being in healthy relationships, avoiding organisms and pollutants. And the doctor did say microbiome. He said that many times. So we're moving towards microbiome as being a primary indicator of health. And if our gut is not healthy, we're not going to be healthy. And of course, the E, our emotions and life experiences. So I would ask anybody who's struggling, are you getting enough sleep? Are you doing these other things? Because if you don't get enough sleep, you're going to have a high blood pressure the next day for 12 hours. If you're stressed, you're going to have a high blood pressure. So I would look at those other factors and don't minimize those. There's no medicine that'll cure you. And you know, the diet is just one piece of the puzzle.
Dr. Williams, do you have anything that you would like to add? Because I know you felt strongly about in the design of this new study that we're trying to get started. You felt strongly about some other things that we didn't do the last time, particularly with the crossover.
Yeah, and so this really had to do with, you know, we ended up in a wonderful journal, but it was a hard fought because the control group was the patient themselves. That is the so-called N of 1 before and after. And while that has a lot of validity, the Samson trial showing that statins actually do work, for example, is an N of 1 trial in New England Journal of Medicine. But for nutrition, everybody wanted to see what they thought was the gold standard. And that's why I went through the details about the Mediterranean diet, because that is got to be the largest misinterpreted data I've ever seen. New England Journal of Medicine, they didn't make it up. The authors didn't make it up. There was no change in heart attack, cardiovascular death, or overall mortality. And so it's often misquoted based on the 30% reduction of the combined endpoint, which was all driven by stroke. So if that's going to be the mandate that we have a randomized trial, that is exactly what we were going to do. And we were, as you mentioned, crossing over 4 weeks of vegan in half the people, 4 weeks of Mediterranean, half the people, crossing over, measuring inflammation, measuring all of the LDL particles, measuring the TMAO at baseline, after 4 weeks, after 8 weeks. And then we're going to do something that we didn't do so much. I mean, we did a couple lectures, and then you were there at the church, and you talked to them all the time. But how do we make it sustainable that a person, which is what everyone on the panel wants to know about, how do you make a change that's going to last for a long time? And the best way is actually to do the education and give people the tools to be able to walk into the grocery store, go to the produce aisle, and go to the cash register when they're done, which is what my advice always is. And so that approach really does need a background of education to undo what people have learned. And if people have not seen that wonderful movie by Jasmine Leah, Invisible Vegan, about the experience of being Black and vegan, it's worth looking at, because she goes through like 10 different sections of, socioeconomic, cultural issues that made us eat the way we are and inherit the diseases that we've had. And so it would be, I think the onus is on us to suck it up as sort of vegan doctors and go ahead and, let some fish meet their demise in a Mediterranean delivery. And hopefully it'll be short-lived and everyone will be convinced. And Dr. Hampton will be talking about vegan diet after seeing I'll always talk about those animals. Let live and live longer.
That's fair. Let me put this question up, Doc, since Janice asked it, and I it's the question that Nikki had started, which was the low carb plant-based diet reducing triglycerides, and just could you comment on that? I definitely have some thoughts about low carb on that.
Triglycerides basically are a referendum about your lifestyle. If you're not exercising, if you have a high insulin level and insulin resistance, higher blood sugar, you're eating fat, you're eating sugar, refined grains. By the way, we may be vociferously going back and forth about data, and but the fact of the matter is, the diabetes gets better with a keto diet. It doesn't matter how you do it. And so the link about the American Heart Association, that was not an endorsement of the change in our guidelines. That was talking about the management of diabetes, and they're talking about short term. There is actually data that if you do the keto diet, the diabetes gets better. If you do the keto diet, you will lose weight. And if you do that, your insulin level will drop and your triglycerides will drop, and you will have an improvement in your hemoglobin A1C. The problem is long-term with that increase in LDL. Raising your LDL total lifetime area under the curve increases cardiovascular mortality. And so when you look at the metabolic analysis that was published a couple of years ago by the National Lipid Association, specifically about keto diets, they went through every study and every way you can look at it, coming to conclusion that there are some benefits. It's just that they're short-term. It's short-term gain, long-term pain, and they recommend against it. So I would say that if you're doing a good exercise level, you're not drinking, you're not eating a lot of fried foods and refined grains, your high triglycerides are going to come down. Now, there are people who have genetically high triglycerides, and they do require some medication, and you might even need omega-3 supplements or medications specifically designed to do that if you have a genetic abnormality.
Yeah, and I definitely agree that triglycerides are, probably one of the first things you want to look at. The good thing about triglycerides and the HDL, the so-called good cholesterol, is that you're getting that with your standard cholesterol panel. So if you do a ratio of triglycerides divided by HDL, it'll help you approximate your risk. I mean, it's not as good as a coronary artery calcium score. By the way, one of the things they had in that statement was that they recommended a coronary artery calcium score as the #1 test for predicting risk for heart disease. It's a $50 test in Advocate Aurora's health system. So I was happy that they did that. But again, so you have your triglycerides. And when I see triglycerides in my patients, that's my #1 indicator that they're doing a low carb diet effectively. And if I see a bump in their HDL, that's another indicator that they're doing the diet effectively. I always caution patients that they may see a slight rise in their LDL. And it tends to level off in most patients. It tends to stay slightly elevated. Now, if my only concern was LDL cholesterol, I would be a little nervous. I also know that I'm not nervous because most people on a low carb diet find that their small particles, which tend to cause more heart disease, are going to be better, and their larger particles may be remain stable or slightly higher. So I guess what I'm getting at is that when I look at the totality of the things that I measure in clinic, I feel comfortable with the approach. But I do agree that if you can do any diet, plant-based or animal-based, and you can lower those triglycerides, you're going to substantially reduce your risk for heart disease. And I would actually be more concerned about my triglycerides than the LDL. And I think the tide is shifting a little bit towards other markers, rather it's the apolipoprotein B or, and other markers that may be better indicators of our risk. So this is really fun because honestly, you don't find too many venues where you have people on either side of the aisle on the same, program. Even the diet doctor just had a conversation with a vegetarian and a Vinnie Tortorich, who made the Beyond Impossible, on the same show. They weren't talking to each other, but they presented both sides. And I'll be honest, both perspectives were presented quite well. So I think it's nice we need to move into the direction of where we're talking to each other and not, pointing at each other. And I think this whole conversation tonight was an example of what's possible. It's just like a good marriage. Me and my wife don't agree on too much, but we've been married for 29 years this year. So it's like you can still kind of have slightly different perspectives, see the world through a different lens, and yet end up working together to help the population.
So if I could respond to that, I agree with you that we need to stay focused on the data. When I was talking about the journal, my comment to them is, I know they're a plantrition project, but if somebody submitted a trial where they tried 10W30 motor oil and it reduced cardiovascular events, and it's a good study, we're going to publish it. It's got nothing to do with plants versus animals. This is about what the data actually shows. I do need to, Dr. Hampton, there's one thing you mentioned about the triglyceride to HDL ratio, and similarly about the non-HDL cholesterol. It was always a little fuzzy, and now we know why. Please, if you go back in time, which I do a lot, to fenofibrate, niacin, torcetrapib, anacetrapib, dalcetrapib, I could go on and on and on, of attempts to raise HDL, and all of them increased mortality, and then the trials were stopped. So please look at CANHEART and the Copenhagen trial. Easiest way to do that is just to put 2 words into your search engine, into Google. 2 words would be HDL mortality. And what you'll see is that a higher HDL increases or associated with a higher death rate and higher heart attack rate. And we had that wrong for 60 years. It's one of the hardest things to talk to people about after you've been telling them X, Y, and Z, and then they come back to clinic and you got to tell them A, B, and C. But, medical knowledge doubles every 73 days. And I'd always tell people, anything I learned more than 18 months ago, I don't trust because there's new data out there. So increasing HDL is a really bad idea. And so please, that ratio can't be right if a person has an HDL that's significantly elevated.
And just one more thing about, can you comment just on the coronary artery calcium score test? Are you in agreement with that? Or do you have
my favorite? Thank you so much for introducing that. And thank you so much for being part of Advocate. Hopefully you can give me 2 minutes to talk about this. It is my favorite test. I think it's the thing that could change the the entire story in the African American community. And if you Google my name and Michelle Ikram, my resident, you will see a publication that will just break your heart. It started with me trying to convince Rush that $95 was too much. Mm-hmm. And so I had one of my residents who was at Mercy Hospital at the time on the South Side in Danny Davis's area, try to get her to just go through the entire Chicagoland area, find out what people are charging, because, you know, those charge masters by law are available. What does it cost out of pocket? Because it's not 75571. That code is not paid by insurance. And so I'm very uncomfortable when I'm talking to a person who I know their struggles. They're from my neighborhood on the South Side of Chicago. Whereas as opposed to somebody who saw me in a movie and they're CEO of some company and they come to see me and I tell them $95, no problem. But when it's food versus rent, $95 is a lot of money. Yeah. And so I was trying to convince Rush to give them away for free. Do some means testing if you had to. But if a person didn't have, just waive the fee. You're going to generate so much health and wealth for the system, because it's a CAT scan. The CAT scan is going to show you a 5.2 centimeter aorta and massive amount of coronary calcium that generates a stress test that will be paid for by insurance. Okay, so I was trying to say that this could be a lost leader that could help so many people. Okay, so she went about it. She got the 40 hospitals in our entire area. And guess what we found? You're not going to believe this. That if you are in the African American community, the odds of you having a hospital that'll do a calcium scan very low. Advocate Trinity is about the only one, not Jackson Park. When she showed this, I would say, what about all the hospitals where I grew up? So Jackson Park, Roseland, St. Bernard, Mercy, they don't offer it. Okay. And so we then did a statistical analysis. The odds of you having it depends on what the income and education level and the racial makeup of the neighborhood is. And then, believe it or not, the pricing, with the exception of Trinity, the pricing is higher in those areas of the African American community where it is available. Completely opposite of what it should be. And by the way, Rush does not charge too much. The average for the 40 hospitals was actually $200. So what I'm saying is that we have a state in this union, Texas, where it's mandated that insurance pays for this test. And if anybody hasn't seen the Widowmaker movie from about 10 years ago, please, it's on Netflix. You can see the whole science behind coronary calcium and how important it is. And all of our guidelines, as Dr. Hampton said, all of our guidelines now recommend coronary calcium for people who are at risk, because it tells us whether or not we need to treat things, okay, by guidelines. But it does two other things. It changes physician behavior and it changes patient behavior to know that you have plaque in those coronary arteries or you don't. You got a 15% risk because you were a smoker and your LDL cholesterol was high, blood pressure is high, and you're 55 years old and African American, and you put into that risk calculator and it got a high level, but you have a negative coronary calcium. As long as your risk is not above 20%, I don't need to give you a statin. We have plenty of time to work on your lifestyle. So it changes everything, and we're not getting it. And so what I would love to see is Congressman Davis figure out how to get, that Texas law to be national so that every community can have this test. We have Obamacare. We have Medicaid. We have it's not so much a lack of coverage anymore in the Black community. It's lack of out-of-pocket cost availability. That's the problem.
Well, we've got some work to do. We have definitely got some work to do. Quickly, there's a question specifically for Dr. Maya Greene. It says HIV puts patients at a higher risk of inflammation, metabolic, and cardiovascular complications. How do we approach this subset for patients?
Well, in accordance with what they're saying, some of the work we do is focused on intake, activity, and what you intake and what you in the activity, because it's a chronic stage of inflammation. And so once you get into that chronic stage of inflammation, you start to see all the sequelae, particularly even the sequelae that they're talking about right now. One of the quickest ways, so there's activity. there's watching what you eat intake. I think Dr. Oluwatoyin Adeyemi did a lot of work looking at vitamin D and started to look at the microbiome and how that's impacted. And there are studies related to HIV that shows the inflammation that starts in the gut. And then the quicker someone, so if you're getting screened and we're getting the viral load down, the virus in the body increases that inflammation. And inflammation, once you get into the inflammatory state, just that cascade that I think the other doctors today had talked about is in play, right? So anything you can do to decrease the antigen or something that's irritating your body, whether it be something you're intaking, whether it be the virus, whether it be, anything you can do to decrease that state of inflammation is going to be healthier long term for your body. So, sorry.
No,
so,
go ahead.
Get screened, follow up with your primary care doctor or someone who specializes in working for people living with HIV. And again, there are a lot of primary care doctors that are well versed in addressing HIV, and there is literature and research, continue going out that shows like the intake that someone has does have an impact overall. So even with HIV.
Well, I know you guys hate when I say this, but it's our time. I even hate to say it, especially when the conversation is so juicy and we learn so much from it. So I hate to have to say that it's our time. But I am going to share Glenn Butler's testimony as we go around our table to figure out what are our thoughts for next Monday. Glenn Butler says, I am in my 8th month of keto diet, and my A1C has gone down from its highest of 13 to now 5.5. I have dropped 30 pounds and my BP is under control. Dr. Hampton ordered a coronary calcium scan last month and my score was 0. I suffered from diabetes for over 11 years until God allowed me to cross the path with Dr. Hampton. Congratulations, Glenn, for being on a different track of healthiness. And congratulations for no longer suffering with diabetes. So hats off to you. And congratulations that your test score was a 0. I hope mine will be the same. As we go around this panel, I want to ask my coworker, Dr. Douglas Graham, what are your thoughts until next Monday? If you wanted to leave something with our viewing audience to inspire them for next Monday, what would that be?
Well, I was just having that discussion with Dr. Hampton, and I'm starting to take score when I go shopping. I'm looking at my grocery cart. I'm saying, do I have berries? Do I have leafy green vegetables? And how did that bag of Doritos get in there? So I'm checking out that and thinking, okay, have I done a good job or not? Am I having breakfast in the morning? Am I eating those berries? I'm having pancakes and bacon. So I'm scoring myself to make sure that I follow the straight and narrow. So that's what I've chosen to do. And I'm hoping that worked for you as well.
All right. Well, Doug, I have to agree with you on 2 things there. One, Dr. Mason has scared me away from my favorite jalapeno potato chips. So I have not had them in a little over a year because he has scared them out of me. But I think the grocery store itself has scared me away from chicken. I was in the grocery store and I wanted some baked chicken wings and a little platter of chicken wings out of going to 5 grocery stores. The lowest I found them was $30. I did not eat chicken. $30 for 10 chicken wings and that one little $30, and that was the cheapest. It was even higher at Aldi's. Yardbird was safe that day because I did not purchase it. All right, Dr. Miller, you're until next Monday. I have the picture to prove it because I took a picture of these chicken wings because I could not believe I had ever seen a price tag. And I asked the people, was this a mistake? Did you guys, in this price is a mistake? No, $30. Dr. Miller, you're until next Monday. You're muted, Dr. Miller.
One of the themes that you always speak of is health is wealth. Well, knowledge is also a very important thing that we need in order to be able to navigate through this life journey. And I think that tonight we were blessed with a great deal of knowledge and information that I don't know if those that are watching are going to be able to get all the understanding. However, what it does point out is that the more that we learn about what we should do, the better position that we're going to be in to be able to adjust and to change things that are harmful to us and to comply with the things that are beneficial to us. So knowledge here. So what we're saying is let's get the information that we need to know that we can do better, we can live better. If you don't know, you can't do it. You can't do what you don't know. So knowledge and understanding will allow you to be able to improve your diet, improve your life, and improve your health.
Fantastic. Dr. 100, you're until next Monday.
Well, 100, I just am like two things. Honored to see our Black men standing up for the health of our community. Honored to kind of be in the presence of such discussion. And what I think is beautiful about this moment too is I remember a couple of weeks back we talked about how we see people looking at different cars, Bugattis and all this other stuff, looking at different jewels and things like that, and putting insurance on homes and other things like that. These discussions put insurance on our life and our vitality, the same way we insure so many other things. One of the things that I really thought about as I listened, because one of the things as one of the newer doctors on here, I'll say newer because I'm younger, I'm not 21, but just look 21, but it is to be silent and listen when rich discussion is going forward and you learn so much. The thing that we, I think eventually has to be unpacked is, how people look at people that are addicted to heroin or cocaine or marijuana, things like that. It got me to thinking about people that are addicted to sugar and fat, and like it's an addiction. It's an addiction, and they will fight you for it. Have you ever, and so that's one of the things. Sugar and sugar predominantly kept running through my mind. Like, at what point do we can say don't do this, and that's opening up a whole can of worms of addicted to the diet. And I think it does have a lot to do with when I start looking at studies about the gut and stuff like that. Sometimes if it's out of control, it starts to tell you what to. And one of my feelings, one of my friends I remember told me when I was younger, I remember we were sitting down eating, and I was like, we went to high school together, and it was after med school. We were sitting down at one of the restaurants. I'll say White Palace Grill because I was eating something that was weird. Like in this discussion, everybody was like, "Oh!" And I noticed that he was eating, and I said, his name was Bashir Muhammad. I said, "Bashir, how come you're not eating? We used to eat the same things, And I noticed he was more fit. He was more, And he said, "Maya, I don't live to eat. I eat to live." And that opened up a lot of discussion. But discussion around addiction, I'd like to put that on the agenda if people don't have things specifically also to sugar and things like that. Yeah. I know that was a long, but.
It's okay. That's one of the congressman's statements throughout the day sometimes. He always says, I don't eat to live. I don't live to eat. I eat to live. So outstanding. Dr. Hampton, you're until next Monday with that picture I just sent you of the $30 chicken wings. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to thank both of my low-fat colleagues, plant-based colleagues, for just being willing to come to this platform. I mean, Dr. Terry Mason was on my podcast, so I really appreciate just being able to have these conversations, because I think that this is the key to our future. For those who are listening, you know, I know we shared a lot of interesting information, facts, we went back and forth, but you know, what I've learned in my clinical practice is that the best predictor of the diet you should have is not necessarily based on, you know, they're going to have genetic tests in the very near future. They have them already, but they're probably not perfect. It's going to tell you this is the best diet for you, right? And some of us will do research, and that research will say, based on our ancestry, this is the best diet for us. The problem with that approach is that our environment affects our current state. So if I was a twin and I had a twin in California and I ate differently there versus the twin that's on the East Coast, that may affect how they respond to diet in a different way. So it's not just a black and white situation. I also want to say that the dietary guidelines, you can't even trust that all the times, because sometimes when they make decisions, it takes a while for them to make decisions that may have that would make sense to you. So some of the things that are being recommended are things that, you know, when I wrote my book 5-6 years ago, I was saying some of the stuff that's just now being accepted as fact. So what I ask anybody to do is to really look at themselves, find some interest in what we're talking about, talk to your doctor. This is just information. And then try to put the pieces together with the guidance of the people that you trust. Because at the end of the day, your body will tell you. I have patients in my practice who are allergic to plants. Who'd have thought, right? They have, you know, they get sick when they eat plants. The anti-nutrients, the lectins and oxalates and phytates, it makes them sick. So do I force them to eat plants? Of course not. So, and then I have people who can't stand eating animals. So we have to individualize the message so that we look at individuals, and you have to participate in that by working with your clinician to tell them what you're experiencing so that they can help guide you in a slightly different direction.
Outstanding, outstanding. Dr. Kim Williams, you're until next Monday being a lifelong Chicago resident and not leaving us. Go right ahead.
Well, thank you. So yes, thanks for sending that picture. I hadn't seen the chicken wing since I don't know when, but it cost you $30. I'm so glad you didn't buy it. But I was just going to say it probably cost a chicken just a hair more, or maybe I should say a feather more.
Yeah.
Okay. And for the case, that's really nice to see the young lady with the diabetes undone. That is just, again, I know I said it earlier, and so did Dr. Hampton, that is very consistent with the literature. But I hope she goes to Dr. Hampton and gets the inflammation level, that is the high sensitivity C-reactive protein, and the LDL level to make sure she's not putting herself at risk by doing the keto and improving weight, blood pressure, and the like. Someone mentioned twin studies, so I put one in but anyone can just Google it, you know, vegan versus omnivore, or versus vegan versus meat eating twin. There actually was a nice little case study that really looked at that, and they could see just what happened to Chris Paul and Kyrie Irving and Novak Djokovic. When they went vegan, all of a sudden they stopped aging as an athlete, and they had better, faster recovery, much more quickness. And Chris Paul is, you know, back to being an all-star when he was actually aging. And that, you know, as not quite 70, but, you know, I'm playing tennis with the college varsity players just because of the plant-based diet. So I have nothing else that I can blame it on, or the blessings of the Lord. So I think that there's we could talk about a lot of different things and great anecdotes here and there. But the most important thing I think that we could come away with is, number one, for next week and forever, refined grains, that Dr. Hampton will agree with me completely. Refined grains are that is sugar sweetened beverages, juicing and throwing the fiber away. All of those things are the worst thing that we could do. I know it upsets my vegan population, because so many vegans are trying to help the planet, and they're trying to help the animal rights, okay? And they're eating vegan ice cream and vegan cupcakes and juicing and all this stuff. Well, there is a good article talking about an unhealthy plant-based diet is worse on the mortality than eating animal products. The two lines, they both go up, but the unhealthy plant-based diet mortality is higher. And so I tell them it is a wonderful diet for the planet, because it saves the animals and gets rid of humans.
All right. Congressman Davis, take us home.
Well, I think Jerry Reinsdorf should probably try and come up with some incentive to keep you around for the bulls.
Right. Absolutely.
They could use a little bit of that. But I decided to check my facts, and I was correct. The guy's name was Harvey Sloan, Dr. Harvey Sloan, and he became the director of the Park Duval Health Center in 1968. I mention that because the same time that people in Louisville were advocating for something new and something different and something they did not have, the people on the near west side of Chicago were doing the same thing. And of course, they convinced Rush to get involved, and they started the Mile Square Health Center. About the same time, same kind of urban area. And of course, Park Duval, like Mile generated, 8 or 10 sites in different places. And I think what you helped us understand this evening is that advocacy can take many forms. And you don't have to necessarily march around Northwestern as the only kind of advocacy. And that professional advocacy can be as effective as what we've traditionally known as street advocacy. And so no matter where you are, there is an advocacy role that you can play. And I think Shakespeare was right when he suggested that the whole world was a stage, and all of us have roles to play, and we can play our part. So I want to thank all of you for the roles that you play and the part that you emphasize. Dr. Williams, when I looked up this history of Park Duval, I say, well, go on to Louisville. They need as much stuff there.
They really do.
As we need here. And so when all of these things are functioning at the same time, that's when we get a body of knowledge and a body of action that brings about the desired changes that we are seeking. So thank you all for another enlightening, exciting Monday evening. And until next Monday, I'm going to try my best. And I've been threatening to have this lady prepare those Simon croquettes. And I've backed off. So I'm going to hold off at least for another week before. So thank you all. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you soon.
Take care.
Thanks a lot, Doc. Appreciate you.
Remember to mask up and get vaccinated. That's what's most important. Let's get rid of coronavirus. We must arrest the virus, mask up, and get vaccinated. Take
Absolutely.
care.
Thank you.
And Dr. Mason wants to say goodbye as well.
Yes.
Yeah, I lost power. I'm on my phone only. I don't know what happened. But I want to thank Dr. Williams for his, and I look forward to giving you an opportunity to come back, Dr. Williams, so we can see your presentation, because we'd like to do that. And I thank you for your continued work and encouragement of a lot of us to do and aspire the level of excellence that you've demonstrated. So I'm grateful for that. And I apologize. I don't know what happened here, but I'll figure out something so I can get around in my place here.
Thanks again.
All right, thanks, guys.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.